All right, everyone, welcome to this lecture on narrative and the documentary. So, one of the things that I want to do with this class is to look at the similarities between film and documentary. When I say film, I'm talking about classical, traditional Hollywood style film and the documentary. Because in many ways, as I've said before, they're they're just as different as they are similar. But I think the documentary has been changing considerably just based upon the examples that you all gave as ones that you like. I see the documentary more about using a lot more entertainment and using traditional Hollywood style storytelling techniques to keep people engaged. And part of that is some of you have noticed that documentaries have become serialized. There's a series of, four, five, six, seven. OJ Made in America was like quite a few. I can't remember how many episodes it was, but it was quite a lot. It won an Academy Award. Um, so I think they're reaching for a similarity between the two genres. But I also want to take time to consider the similarities that are just there in terms of what it means to tell a story, whether it's a narrative that is fictional or based on reality that's been fictionalized. So you use actors and locations and props. It's a staged recreation of something. Whether it's based on the imagination of a writer somewhere or whether it's based on some kind of fact. Like, for instance, Braveheart is based on a William Wallace, although it's not a documentary, right? It's been completely fictionalized in a lot of ways. Whereas a documentary is supposed to be grounded in fact and not basing itself on the entertainment value, but at the core of it should be fact. But we have this issue of story, and I think that's ultimately what we're coming to when we go to see a movie. So sit back and enjoy this little video here. I'll play it for you. You don't have to do anything. Just watch and enjoy and see if you notice anything. So, did you see a pattern or a story emerge through the shapes moving? Your mind starts to put a story together with what's there. And I mean, this is just simple shapes moving around. But it's very interesting how you can start to see or start to develop your own kind of story. And I've heard them all. I've heard it's like a horror film. I've heard it's like Romeo and Juliet. I've heard it's like a comedy. That people begin to see what's going on, what the relationships are between the elements. So the point being is we naturally gravitate towards story And where we're not told story, we start to, I don't want to say make up what that story is, but we will fill in the gaps on our own. That's just the way our minds work. That's the way that we're hot wired, evolutionary speaking, is that we will, story is just so ingrained with us that we will put it in place where story needs to be made. We will start to find it. And so this is an example of how our mind, since we're not being told a story, seeks to create one on its own. If you didn't see a story, pause everything here and go back and rewatch what just happened, and see if you start to see one. See if you start to see any kind of pattern or anything like that emerge. Okay, so this is from Aristotle. Aristotle says the most beautiful colors put together without order will not give the same pleasure as an ordered, simple black and white sketch. Is this true? What do you think? Let me read it again. Even the most beautiful colors put together without order will not give the same pleasure as an ordered, simple black and white sketch. Is this true? Think about it. Let's look at an example. Okay, on the left, we have beautiful colors put together. There's no real order to it. There's no schemata. There's no kind of structure to it, yet it's beautiful and it's pleasing. Are we more drawn towards a simple black and white sketch than we are to colors being together? I mean, there's pros and cons to both. But I think in general, humans gravitate towards orderedness and to structure. We might have an appeal towards that which is beautiful or that which is abstract, but I think we're more likely to be drawn towards order and structure because we all want that. We don't necessarily want disorganization in our life. We don't necessarily want, I don't want to say chaos, but we want to know that life is adhering to some kind of rule. And so with documentaries, there needs to be some semblance of structure to it. Now, the first thing you're thinking is there are kind of artistic, poetic, avant-garde documentaries out there, certainly, and we will look at those. But even in themselves, there's a orderness to it, even if there isn't a narrative order. So they do exist. Yes, they do. They have their place. Yes, they do. And just film in general. I love kind of out there anti-narrative film. Tree of Life changed my life. I will show you that. Probably won't watch it in class, but I will. I'll find a link to it at some point because it's worth watching. It's a little bit like a documentary. But anyway, all this is to say is that documentaries, I do believe, for the most part, still adhere to some sort of structure, especially when it comes to story structure and keeping their audience involved. And speaking of audience, what is our role as an audience? What do we contribute to the film? Are we just passive? Think of when you watch a film that you've enjoyed and when you watch a documentary that you've enjoyed. What has been different about your participation in watching it? Think about the way the story was presented to you with the film versus the documentary. Part of it, I think, is our motivation when we go into something. That is to say, we know what we're getting. We're investing these 2 hours of our life. We sort of know what we're getting, what we plan on getting out of it going in. But knowing what is it, what are we going to get? I think for film, it's that we get to sit back and enjoy a story and be taken on a more or less journey with characters where we are vicariously putting ourselves in their position. So we're living out their life, as it were. We're connecting ourselves to them and their experience. We're having this sort of shared experience with a character. Um, Many of you used Star Wars as your example of a film you like, which that's awesome because I love Star Wars. But we put ourselves in that position where we're Luke, we're Han, or we're Leia, or we're whoever. We connect with the characters in a story and go with them along through the plot, and we live sort of vicariously. We're peeping through our TV into this world. We're going through the screen into this world, and we're saying, I want to participate in this. And it's sort of one of the reasons why we have a different experience going to a theater to watch a film, where we're fully invested. The screen is huge, the lights are dark, and hopefully people are quiet and off their phones. So we're fully immersing ourselves in this world, because that's what we're going into. That's what we're wanting, is to be taken on this journey. Whereas with a documentary, we're sort of more or less going into it knowing or saying, not that we're not going to be entertained, but we know we're not going to align ourselves with whoever this character is, or who it's based on, or the situation. We are wanting to absorb, like a sponge, all the facts that we can get out of a situation. So it's more of collecting information is part of our experience versus going with the character on this experience. Because the reason we watch film is we have this catharsis. If you've taken English class before, you know that cathartic feeling is the reason we watch film. It is that release of emotion that we have. You've probably heard your friends saying it was such a cathartic experience, where this emotion, that's why we tear up at the end of a movie. Only a couple have ever really gotten me, but we have this purging of emotion that goes through us that we as humans want to have. We've been through such a journey that we're just kind of purged of all emotion. I will say there have been some documentaries, because we know it's real and because it's like grounded in fact, it can be on the cathartic level, not even necessarily cathartic, more disturbing. It can really hit us where we live viscerally, because we know it's real. There are definitely those out there, it's sort of like all these murder mystery ones that sort of come up that are like entertaining and engaging and people love them, but at the same time it's like, yeah, it's about murder and it's so dark, and you have this sort of different kind of reaction than seeing death in a film. You could watch a movie where 1,000 people are killed and have a little bit less of a cathartic reaction than it's like one person getting killed in sort of these murder mystery or whatever the case may be that are out there. So we kind of have this very different outcome from watching a documentary versus a film. And again, I think the point of watching a documentary is we're seeking to gather information about whatever the topic is, whoever this character is, whatever this situation is, whatever information I can squeeze out of this documentary so I become a better human because of it. I'm more well-rounded. I'm more educated because I have viewed this. And I think that's the point. And I think if along the way we can be entertained by that documentary, all the better. So I think that scale of entertainment versus fact is kind of what we need to start looking at. Does entertainment whitewash fact? Does fact bore us too much to be entertained? How do we blend the two? So when we're talking about film, and that ride that we go on with a character, there's sort of a very interesting study that was done. Joseph Campbell did this, where he talked about all these different civilizations, all these different religions throughout time have used a very similar story structure. And the greatest myths, the greatest stories ever written, kind of follow this same sort of logical pattern, as it were, called the hero's journey. And it's kind of all about a character getting called to an adventure, going out of their ordinary world into the unknown, where they have trials, failures, they grow, they have sort of a spiritual death and rebirth, they finally change, they seek out what they started to accomplish along the way, and they return home a better person because of it. So it's a very, 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 I mean, you could spend a whole semester just talking about this, but we can apply this to Star Wars is kind of interesting since it's encompassing a lot of films, but we could take, for instance, Finding Nemo. Okay, so in the beginning, we have Nemo kind of is this lone fish that survives. There's this sort of hook in the beginning, and the father is very protective of him. Nemo gets stolen, so Marlin has to start out from his normal world where he's this paranoid, everything's bad, everything's horrible, but he has this call to adventure that he's got to go and find his son. So he has to cross into this new world where he meets allies and enemies. He has to learn to grow to get rid of his fear of that the world is dark and bad, and he has to learn to change in order to return home with his son. So again, a very quick overview of kind of the pattern that we go on in fiction film with a character. Again, we are aligning with this character or characters and go on this journey with them. And that is film. And that's what we've come to know. And again, what is the point of the documentary? We don't necessarily always follow this pattern. When you watch King of Kong as one of the two movies this week, look and see, look for that journey. Look for the similarities of the way that we have this journey that a character can go on. See if you notice any of it, if there's any pattern, any similarity. You don't have to memorize what all of these necessarily are, but you can, compare them to films that you do know. I don't want to get too bogged down in know what I mean by the call to adventure, the refusal to call. Just put it in terms of King of Kong reminds me of, even though it's a documentary, reminds me of a film where this character, blah, 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 blah. So I'm just trying to get you to see if there are those patterns there. So we have two components. We have the narrative, what the story is, the recounting or telling of events, and we have plot, the structure, how the story is told. It's the parts that connect. So if we look at it in terms of this, plot and structure is the skeleton. It's everything that builds and holds everything together. All right, the narrative and story is like you. Are you more than your skeleton? You probably, if somebody said, "Who are you?" you wouldn't just say, "I'm a skeleton." I am a person who has integrity. I'm kind. I'm a loving person. I'm a son, daughter. I'm a boyfriend. I'm a girlfriend. I'm a parent. I'm whatever who you are as a person is kind of more what defines you versus what you're made up of. So if we have the story, the soul of where it's at, the plot and structure, how it's put together. So the narrative breakdown is the totality of the plot, the opening and the ending, where the action starts and stops. It's the smaller elements collected together to comprise the whole of the story. So plot refers to the ordering of the elements based in causation. in a sort of logical flow. And that goes back and forth between film and documentary. There has to be some sense of causation that sort of goes with it. And we kind of see plot and structure go hand in hand. Let me give you an example. So, if you probably some of you have seen Pulp Fiction, given that it's a college class, and I believe you've all taken film classes. I'm going to assume you have. So if we look at the structure of the story, the elements in which they flow, if we look at this as going in chronological order, right? But of course, if we've seen Pulp Fiction, we know that the structure is completely different. Time is changed, time is manipulated. So film and documentary can both share that as long as there is some semblance of causation. Why are we moving from here to here, from this timeline to this timeline, right? That story has to have some sort of cohesion to it. It's got to logically make sense. So it's got to be plotted out just right. And if you look at some of these documentaries that are out there that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I mean, it's taken years to put these things together to find that just right sweet spot for, putting together this plot, the structuring of the event, but also building that story around it. Because I do think that a documentary has got to have something of a compelling story to it. Otherwise, it's just a series of images. So I really think that growth and story must be retained throughout, the entirety of the film, entirety of the documentary, to keep you captivated. I mean, even with, the documentary series that are on now, I mean, just think how one ends, right? It's always something big happening that you got to tune in to watch, right? So they're that structuring that story to keep you engaged so that you do go to the next episode and you start that hero journey kind of cycle all over again in some capacity of whatever it might be. Documentary has a little bit more liberty to plot itself out differently. For instance, a narrative film like Finding Nemo that I just used that example of, you have all that opening exposition and you have Nemo being stolen, very early on in the film so that you can move forward. It's not drawn out, it's not long, it's not tedious with it. Whereas a documentary can be a lot more flexible on the arrangement of the plot in order where it's doing it. It still needs to take you on, I think, a logical journey. Even more so than film, you've got to really sequence it so that we know what's going on and that we're able to want to stay on this journey with the film. So this is another thing too that I've kind of found while watching documentaries is they're very concise. They don't offer more than what is needed. And this kind of Aristotelian notion of say what the story demands. There shouldn't be dead weight in a documentary. It's like, okay, this part, really is unnecessary. It tells us nothing. We gain nothing from it. It's unimportant, right? If you've probably now no longer own DVDs, but back in the day when you had a DVD, you'd always see deleted scenes on it. Okay, documentaries definitely don't want those deleted scenes. People are out to just get the information, and any sort of superfluous information provided by a documentary is, I think, that much more taking you out of the story than a film would do. We kind of know film's going to have a little bit of dead weight to it, but that documentary story, if there's sort of any component to it that we're like, why are they telling us this? Why do I need to know this? This is so important. That's where we're really taken out of that world of the documentary. So really, this all boils down to why do we watch documentaries? What is our journey as an audience? Hopefully it's something to kind of start thinking about. Um, to realize, okay, what those similarities with film. I sit down and I watch a film because of this. I sit down and watch a documentary because of this. How do I grow? How do I change? Do I still have that cathartic experience from watching a documentary? I think it's worth thinking about. And as you watch the films this week, keep that in mind. Is story structure important to a documentary? What How do I align with what's going on in a film? Is it just the information? Am I engaged in the story? Are they giving me some sort of story element to it? Okay, and then especially with the King of Kong, what story typical film elements do they use to help tell this story? So look at those similarities. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. We're kind of dealing with a little bit of abstractness mixed in with some Aristotle, and because story is so important to me, I wanted to get this in here, and I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the films this week.